If it's important to you, you will find a way. If not, you'll find an excuse. As we've sat here debating to fund our institutions of higher education or not, we've heard excuse after excuse after excuse as to why we couldn't possibly fund the money needed for our college students today. It's the wrong timing. It's the wrong dollar amount. Taxes haven't increased enough. It's not part of the right framework. So as I sat here listening to this discussion, I Googled excuse. That's the first quote that came up. If it's important to you, you will find a way. If not, you'll find an excuse. Today we see what's important to the members of this chamber. Some folks have talked about, well, they're only willing to vote for higher education if it's part of the original framework. Well, let's revisit what was in the original framework. Because 2 months ago, when we talked about the original framework, that framework had property tax reform. That framework had a first dollar referendum for future property tax increases. That framework had pension reform. That framework had liquor privatization. By the time we got to Christmas, the only things left in that framework were higher sales, higher income taxes, or higher both for increased spending. Everything else was gone. That's not a framework agreement. That's just new taxes, higher taxes for more spending. We're not prepared to vote for that today, tomorrow, next month, or next year. If folks want to revisit the entire framework, all the other items come back on the table too. You don't get to selectively choose higher taxes for higher spending. Secondly, if folks want to talk about the frustration in getting a complete budget done, even though this chamber has sent this governor 3 budget proposals over the last 6 months, let's talk about the frustration of 250 line items in this most recent budget proposal that we sent the governor to be vetoed that were his numbers. It's tough to reach a final agreement when you can't get somebody to accept, yes, we agree with you as an answer. Next, let's look at this from a revenue perspective. Folks have said, we don't have enough revenue to send money to our college students. We don't have enough revenue to send money to higher education because we don't have enough money for public schools. That's just plain out not true. Not even close. The budget secretary last week certified a revenue number, $29.87 billion. Then the governor line item vetoed around $6.5 billion worth of spending. So right now we have a budget, right now in this state, that spends $23.4 billion. What does that mean for the people of Pennsylvania? That means we've got $6.4 billion sitting over in the Treasury, waiting to be appropriated, waiting to be sent to our public schools, waiting to be sent to our human service agencies, waiting to be sent to our colleges that cannot be released because folks are insistent in continuing to hold hostage the people of this state, even though the revenue is there. If you look at the line items that most of us and most people in Pennsylvania would agree that the governor vetoed, the governor cut, that we would most like to restore, the top priorities: basic education, pre-K through 12, a $400 million increase, medical assistance programs for our neediest citizens, our impoverished citizens, our disabled, our elderly, our children, higher education, as well as what we are continuing to debate today, the Department of Corrections to keep our communities safe. If you add up the total appropriations that the governor cut with his veto, you get $6.5 billion. $6.5 billion price tag to fully fund all of those items. Increase education by over $400 million, send a 5% increase to our institutions of higher education, $6.5 billion, and we're sitting on $6.4 billion. We're $100 million off. $100 million out of a $29 billion budget. Where can we get $100 million from? Well, the budget secretary, as part of the framework agreement, said he would lapse $199 million. And for those in this chamber, for those in the gallery, and for those listening at home who don't know what that means, lapsed funds are funds that were appropriated in budgets from previous years but was never spent. Meaning, somebody's just sitting on the cash somewhere in state government. It's sitting there waiting to be used, but can't be until the budget secretary releases it. $199 million. All the budget secretary has to do is spend half that. And we fully fund a $400 million increase for basic education. We fully fund a 5% increase to higher education. We fully fund medical assistance for our neediest citizens, and we fully fund the Department of Corrections. Or we could just look at the line item vetoes for the legislature. The governor vetoed $89 million out of the General Assembly. Maybe we should accept those cuts. We can accept those cuts and we can fully fund a $400 million increase to education. We can fully fund a 5% increase to higher education. We can fully fund medical assistance, and we can fully fund the Department of Corrections. Governing isn't about rhetoric. Governing and budgeting isn't about holding hostages. It's about prioritizing spending. Because you're not spending your money, you're spending somebody else's money. Today, we have the opportunity to do it with the right set of priorities, and I would encourage our members, let's send the money to our public schools, let's send the money to our colleges, let's send the money to our students. Let's release the hostages, and let's move on to a better day in this state. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.